Back when Toy Biz was making Marvel Legends and not paying their tooling bill, they created some of the biggest action figures at the time. They were a lot bigger than we were used to, standing 12, 14 inches tall, and in order to assemble them, you had to get all of the parts together, and this meant toy hunting or being lucky enough to find an entire wave on the shelf at the same time, because you'd have to buy all figures and the build a figure piece. Constructing them would let you get your bonus, and boy, what a bonus these figures were back then when Build-A-Figures were that tall. It was pretty massive in terms of both physical size and impact on the toy industry. What started off as a one-time gimmick to drive sales for Marvel Legends for Toy Biz and worked, sales rose over 78%. Well, obviously, soon Galactus was going to be joined by quite a few other buddies in the big scale before even Toy Biz had to scale the Build-A-Figures down a little bit because of cost. And while they get a lot of credit for all the innovation they brought to the action figure category, they can't be seen as the very first Build-A-Figure. I mean, after all, for decades we've been able to buy toys where the end result was constructing some type of figurine, and many times the interchangeability of the parts was the entire play pattern and the point of a Build-A-Figure. I mean, heck, from that kind of standpoint, you could even look at good old Mr. Potato Head as an example of a Build-A-Figure, especially when originally you actually had to use him building a potato, and he had friends like a yam and a carrot. No, go ahead and Google it. So while most of the time figures that are being built tend to be for educational purposes because you're learning about, well, how maybe a dinosaur works or a human body or a tree trunk, there have been times when building a figure has been incorporated very successfully into kid-aimed product. The Mashers line from Hasbro that extended across multiple licenses is a great example. And for the adult collector market, I especially love the way Hasbro was able to take the kid-aimed bottom shelf big box item for the first Avengers movie and do a build-up sold at Comic-Con where you could get an extended section of the runway, quite literally, and make your ship that much bigger, or your helicarrier. Helicarriers are ships. McFarlane Toys, which has carried forward the Build-A-Figure concept, started with Marvel and DC and now more DC, had a Bane figure recently that you had to buy over multiple waves in order to complete. And this led to a lot of fans saying, well, wait a minute, if you could build over one wave or two, could you build over an entire year? Or what about multiple years? It seems like with Build-A-Figure, there is all of this potential, leading to us to say, well, if you can make a Bane figure and you can make a larger helicarrier, what else can Build-A-Figures do? Looking back again at the Toy Biz time of Marvel Legends, as they closed the door and left the license behind, again because they didn't pay their tooling bill, as I like to fondly remember the Darkhawk that almost was so close to a 1992 Darkhawk. But besides having Darkhawk in their planning banks, they also looked at doing the biggest Build-A-Figure ever at the time, the Absorbing Man. You can see a car and a person on the bottom right for scale, showing just how big he was going to be. Or what if they took the Build-A-Figure concept to vehicles, and a planned proposed Quinjet, a build-up, was in the works, as well as an X-Men Blackbird, which might have even been able to use some of the same parts. Well, with all of these ideas floating around the table, it does really seem like Build-A-Figures could unlock so much potential to bring giant things. Well, unfortunately, the reality check is no, it doesn't quite work like that at all. While it's a nice fantasy to think you could do anything all the time, there is the reality. And I can actually explain this very factually and, well, give you why. So, when you're looking at planning out a new wave of action figures, it all starts with costs. Well, I guess it starts with character choice, but then costs are still worked out per slot, per figure. And some will cost a little more, some a little less, but on average you have to hit your target cost. You do this with a combination of new parts and reuse parts. New parts are the ones that have to be tooled. Reuse, obviously you already have the tool. But you still have to figure out the cost of the basic plastic, which in this case, without thinking about the capital expense of tooling, you're still dealing with relatively the same amount of plastic into each figure. Maybe a smaller figure like Yoda or Sprite uses less. All of this is tracked on what's called a P&L, a profit and loss statement. This is an old one I had from my Mattel days. Obviously, I'm not showing any of the confidential information, but you can see down the left side are the names of the figures. We're looking at some He-Man figures there. And then across the top are all of the things that are tracked. Things like the target cost, things like the packaging cost, the margin, the royalty, the MC, and then finally at the end, design and development and tooling. All of this would then get presented to upper management for an annual product line, and management would either give it the thumbs up, thumbs down, or stick a thumb in your ear. Now, spreading out a Build-A-Figure over multiple years becomes kind of a ridiculous amount of work. And the reason is each wave has to be approved. If you had to approve 2 years worth of product, 1 year worth of product at a time, it would require working out the costs of all of that. And that becomes an insurmountable amount of work for relatively little payoff. Working out so many different figures, especially when by the time they get made, you don't know if the costs are going to be the same. They change year on year. When we were doing the Green Lantern movie line, one of the things that we were really excited for was how toyetic the character was, and it led us to have some really big dreams for how much we could do with the collector line. I mean, it seemed like it had everything on paper. So that became in reality the giant Build-A-Figure, or as we legally called it, Collect and Connect, of Parallax, the cloud-like villain from the film. And yes, I know the film did not have the worldwide reach that we all hoped it would, but those of us in the toy category definitely put our heart and soul into making this an amazing Collect and Connect figure. But it's also an example of why you can't stretch these out over multiple years. The reason being is when you put out a Build-A-Figure, or Collect and Connect, TM and copyright, and you include a piece with each figure, that's that giant glob of yellow you see there, well, you have to put out all the pieces. If you show or promise that, buy 12 figures, 16 figures, 10, 3, whatever it is, that you have to be able to assemble all of them. When the movie didn't perform as well and several back-end waves needed to be canceled, we had to squish all the remaining pieces into a final SKU and release it with a new mini Hal Jordan to sort of explain away the play pattern of why you were getting weird blob parts of a yellow creature that you really needed to assemble with the rest of his body. Luckily we got by, but boy was it a mess. I mean, having to pull back or add SKUs, change things in the middle like that, it's difficult. It can be done, and when you have a major motion picture and the budget for that, but it still begs the question, is the juice worth the squeeze? For all that effort just to get something giant out or something even bigger and encourage people to buy a full year of product, kind of like an online subscription program, well, luckily a solution has been found, and both Mattel and Hasbro have put out very large, well, okay, Mattel just working on a playset, but still large items, or in this case, HasLab large figures, where you no longer need the Build-A-Figure concept. You can just buy the giant figure direct. Granted, it's expensive. You could look at something like this and say this is a sail barge, but you could also say it's a sushi holder, or probably more accurately, it's a sail barge-shaped dollhouse. That's what you're buying, a dollhouse to display your figures. But that's great. So while Toy Biz did dream big of doing these giant concepts spread over many, many figures, in reality, it turns out that this is possible, but just not done through that method. You can't break up a Quinjet, but you could sell a sail barge straight up and just sell the whole thing at once. And in a way, that's a lot better because it opens the door to so many more possibilities, and if fans step up and want to support an item they see being made, they have the option of doing that. While the Build-A-Figure concept was great, it has really been replaced, and that can be kind of, actually, this is really sad. I don't want to end the video like that. Let's just look at Mr. Potato Head again. Build-A-Figures are here to stay, but doing giant things, there's a more direct way of getting them now, and online has really been the solution. If you like this video, please do share it with others. It's the best way to support the channel. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Always open to suggestions for future videos, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks again.